So welcome everyone to the Encountering God retreat. We're here virtually, of course, since we're in unique times right now. So it's a retreat that will have several parts, and that obviously you are joining from your home or wherever you are. If at any point you have questions or need to communicate with me, please feel free to use the chat feature. Which if you haven't used Zoom before, it's at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see that if you are moving your mouse around. So please let me know if we have any technical difficulty. Otherwise, I will just be continuing with our talk. So we'll do a little bit of talking. I'll say a few things about chanting, because today is our day to talk about chanting. And then we'll actually do some chanting, and then have some time for reflection and discussion. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Erica Murphy. I am an instructor here where I live in Connecticut. And I also teach meditation and mindfulness, as well as Qigong. So I love to bring in my experience both as an instructor and as someone who has done meditation practices for over 10 years as a way of thinking through our spiritual journey. My background is in theology, and I've really enjoyed going on an intellectual journey in terms of my studies. But at the same time, we also need to do certain practices in order to help us as we move through the different phases of our spiritual journey, no matter where we are or where we feel like we want to go. And I've also had the pleasure of visiting Holy Cross many times over the past 20 years, at least, I think, by now. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I've given several retreats at Holy Cross also, and I've really enjoyed my time there, getting to know people who are coming from all different places, both literally, geographically, and also in terms of what they are seeking, what they're exploring. And I wanted to offer this particular retreat called Encountering God as a way of really talking about what it means to experience God directly. It's very easy to talk about God, discuss different aspects of what our beliefs might be, as I do in the undergraduate class that I teach at college. If we are real aspirants on the journey, we really want to have that direct experience for ourselves. So coming home to the knowledge of our innate nature that is expressed in every religious tradition. So most of what I teach really spans different religious traditions, thoughts, and faiths, because at the heart of all of them is this ability, this focus on love, on devotion. And that's what takes us to this realm of truth that is beyond our human mind. And that takes a little doing, right? As I said before, the practices are important. So practices such as meditation, such as mindfulness, prayer, Qigong, all of those inward practices that help us to really start training the mind, focusing the mind inward instead of externally. That's what helps us to go beyond what we normally feel that we're capable of. I took the title of the retreat is taken from the book called Encountering God by Diana Eck. The retreat is not based on her book, but she has a very interesting story to tell She is a professor of religious studies at Harvard and is a very committed Christian, and at the same time feels as if Christianity could be informed by other religious traditions and practices. So she's done a number of research expeditions and gone to India, for example, to really experience what that tradition brings to our ideas about what it means to have a relationship with God. So if you're interested in that kind of text, that's something good to look into. So this idea of the encounter, right? Very often what our practices might look to do or may say in the realm of thinking, right? So our minds love to try to figure out things. And when I teach mindfulness and meditation, I really emphasize the language of separating who we are from what the mind is. So really being clear that our mind can go through all kinds of fears, anxieties, doubts. It can go through anger, jealousy, right? But that's not defining who we are, right? Again, going back to the heart across religious traditions that tells us that we are love, right? We are the children of God. So putting aside what the mind would like to tell us, and instead bringing to our awareness that we are the infinite. We are the infinite love, the infinite compassion, the infinite wisdom of the divine. And we can do that in many different ways, as I've already mentioned. So today we'll be focusing on the chanting and mantra. Tomorrow we meet at the same time and we'll be focusing on scriptural texts. And on Sunday we'll meet again and we will focus on the breath. So how the breath helps to calm the mind and give us access to that space beyond the rational mind that we're usually used to identifying with. So this spiritual quest is really about what we are identifying with. We're used to identifying with the things of the ordinary mind, right? The fact that we are in a body, and it's really hard not to identify with the body, especially when we're sick, right? The body can get ill, it can get disease. We identify with the roles we play, right? The fact that we are a mother, or that we are a nurse, or a teacher, or an electrician, right? We start to feel that that is who we are. And what the wisdom traditions teach us, again, across traditions, is that that is not who we are. It is wonderful and can be a joy and privilege to perform our roles in the world. And we can do that with love and patience when we are identified with our true nature. So we want to be able to immerse ourselves in a different reality. And that's where the idea of chanting and mantra comes in. So there are lots of different kinds of chanting, right? You may be familiar, for example, with Gregorian chant. There's also the beautiful music of Hildegard of Bingen, for example, Christian mystic. And there are many of those, and we bring those up also in the undergraduate class that I teach. Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart, Nicholas of Cusa, Julian of Norwich. There's a very long list of Christian mystics who dive deeply into this idea that each human being has the capacity to have a direct experience of God. And that's why we'll talk about scripture tomorrow and sacred texts, because it's these authors who give us that that experience, right? We don't know what it's like as people with minds that wander around, that cause a lot of problems. But those who have had that experience write about it. Mystics like Hildegard brought music from it. She was also an incredible painter, among many other things that she did. So in Christianity, there's a long tradition of mysticism, right? In the Jewish tradition, we have the Kabbalah, right? The Kabbalist tradition that is it is a mystical tradition. Again, with that idea that we can have a direct experience of God. And to do that, we need to be going on a certain path, right? The same with the traditions of Buddhism, for example. Buddhism would not be considered a mystical religion, but there are definitely, it's based on direct experience. So let me just pause for a second. So Kimberly is saying she's having technical issues. So if anyone else is having technical issues, please, you can put that in the chat. So I don't know when this will be available as a recording because Holy Cross is doing it, but okay, thanks Mary for confirming that. It's looking okay on your end. It's hard to tell sometimes where the technical issues are coming from. So I will check with Aiden at Holy Cross and let you know, Kimberly, when it will be available, just in case you get dropped or whatever. Also, if anyone falls out of our virtual space, feel free to pop back in, and you'll come back into the meeting. I've taken off the waiting room so you can just pop back in. Okay. Yes. So the heart of mysticism. Also in the Islamic tradition, and I wanted to just share my screen with you to bring up this. Well, first I'll share Hildegard. You may be familiar with her. This is a picture of her receiving her divine inspiration, her visions. And I encourage you, if you haven't heard her, to look her music up on YouTube or wherever you might find it. It's really quite divine and really takes you to a different space. And then let me share my screen again. And then I'll share this, right? So this is, if you haven't heard of them, the whirling dervishes, right? Part of the Islamic tradition. So Sufism is the particular part of Islam that focuses on that direct experience and how to get there. And this is one particular way that Sufis do that. They also do scripture study and, you know, some of the other ways that other traditions take part in that. But they get on the stage and they start twirling around, right? And it's also accompanied by music, right? So there's this real solid sense of shifting into a different state. And that's what we are looking for with these practices, is moving our sense of the ordinary state to the transcendent state. And it's not that we permanently leave the ordinary state behind. You're not leaving your responsibilities behind, or and when I say responsibilities, I mean responsibility to yourself, to the people around you, to your community, right? We stay with that, but we add to that a transcendent awareness that also is beyond everything that the ordinary mind is familiar with. So that's one of the, I think, maybe misconceptions about mysticism in general, is that the mystic is someone who simply goes off in their mind and is absorbed in the divine, and then kind of stays there, and then doesn't take care of what they need to take care of in the ordinary world. So it's a kind of escape, right? That's sometimes how it's portrayed. But if we're talking about the spiritual journey as a hero's journey, I'll stop sharing this now. And I do a retreat that is called the Hero's Journey, where I outline the different stages that of the hero's journey as Joseph Campbell talks about them. And I'll say them very briefly now. First stage is departure, right, where you leave the ordinary world and you go into this other special world. It's the world of transcendence, where possibilities are expanded and you often have challenges. Then there's the experience of the challenges, where you need to move through those challenges and go through a transformation. And then after that, there's the return. So the full journey includes a return into the ordinary world. And even when we have for example, a sitting practice of meditation, we're going into a different space when we have that practice, right? We're sitting down, but we are leaving the ordinary world behind for maybe very briefly, but it's still a space that's different than our ordinary awareness or concerns. So being clear about the stages, and also being clear about the goal of the journey, right? That it's you that are adding to your ordinary experience this transcendent, joyful, blissful, transcendent domain. So that's what the practices are looking to get us to, and in particular, chanting. So moving into the idea of chanting. So if you are not familiar with the idea of mantra, I'll just say a couple things about that now. So the word mantra is a Sanskrit term that means to protect, or that which protects. So it's really meant to protect us from the workings of our mind, when our mind might be causing us suffering, basically, in all the many ways that it does. And so having a word or a phrase that we repeat over and over helps us to have the mind occupied on something that is uplifting, and not going into all these other rifts of maybe anxiety or fear. So mantra has been used for thousands of years, was developed in the yogic tradition, continued in the Buddhist tradition, and is a fairly well-known word now. Mantras traditional mantras especially, have a special vibration and power. It's said that people who originally started meditating thousands of years ago heard these mantras. So they're not something that was thought of from the mind, that someone invented. They were heard because these are vibrations and energy that is always with us. And that's also something very important to note here too, that we're connecting to something that is always available. It doesn't seem like it's available, right? So when I talk about the infinite compassion and the infinite love of the divine, at some point you might think to yourself, well, I have a hard time loving my spouse sometimes, or my children, or whoever it is that is very dear to you. The mind has a hard time keeping that love in the midst of difficulty. But the mystic tradition tells us that the transcendent realm in which we experience ourselves as love, right? Not having love, not doing anything, just pure love with an expanded sense of awareness. And that is available even in the midst of turmoil, external turmoil, internal turmoil, great pain in the body, whatever it is. The state of meditation, in which it is a state that's constant, but we talk about meditation usually as a practice, so that we become more and more aware that we can always tap into that. And having and using mantra helps us to immerse the mind in that truth, right? It serves as a vehicle to take the mind beyond its ordinary state. And when we get to the highest levels of spiritual attainment, the mind is ultimately left behind. It can't go beyond a certain point because it's simply too limited to take in all of what God or however you call it, the universe, chi, Buddha mind, Christ consciousness. It goes by many different names, but it's that meditative state that mystics connect to and that we also can connect to. So mantra as a constant reminder of that and a coming home to that in the midst of our day-to-day lives. And as we set the mantras to music, we have that heightened sense of emotion and devotion, right? So we start to cultivate that sense of devotion within ourselves that allows us to more readily access that state. So there's an analogy that my meditation teacher uses that I think is very helpful, which is dyeing a cloth, right? If you take a cloth and you dip it in the dye and lift it up, it will have some of that color, but it won't be completely dyed through, right? You have to keep dipping it and dipping it and dipping it. And especially, again, in the midst of everything that happens in our everyday lives, which is actually reinforcing what the mind, the limitations of the mind, and the mind's belief that that's the only reality. So we have to keep coming back to these practices. And so we put music to mantra and we can chant. And there are many different kinds of mantras that we can use, and I always recommend that people use one that they feel connected to. And I'll talk about that a little bit after we do our chanting. But there are, Islamic chants, there are Jewish chants, there are Christian chants and mantras. One that is particularly simple and powerful and that I've used in my practice is, and that we'll be using today, is Om Namah Shivaya. So I'm going to put that in the chat so that you can see it. And you'll know how to pronounce it. Because I'll be playing a recording in a little bit and allowing you to engage that mantra in whatever way you would like. That particular mantra comes from the yogic tradition. So when I say yoga, I'm not talking about the stretching that we often think about when we have or go to yoga class. It's the full philosophy and practices that come from the yogic tradition, which was developed thousands of years ago. And you can translate Om Namah Shivaya as I bow to the auspicious one within. Right? So you probably, Om is a fairly popular and well-known mantra right now, right? You can see it on bumper stickers in yoga class. People often chant Om. That's the primordial sound of the universe. Namah Shivaya, right? The name of Shiva. So we want to remember that we are not evoking anything outside of ourselves. We are evoking our Shiva nature, which is that nature that I've been talking about, that transcendent nature that we all have access to. Again, it is talked about in different ways, right? Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, but it's the indescribable space beyond the mind that is pure being. And that allows us to simply experience God, right? So thinking about your ability to simply immerse your mind in the mantra, I'm going to play the recording. It's a fairly slow chant of Om Namah Shivaya. You can either simply listen to it, if that's most comfortable for you. You can also repeat it silently to yourself in your mind. I would say for, especially for this brief time that we have, if you can, to say it out loud and chant with the recording. And that will, because it brings vibration to your body, right? You can literally feel the physical sensation. So give yourself whatever experience, again, feels comfortable for you. But that will kind of help to clear the mind, right? The mantra ushers in silence. So what we will do is we will chant for, they do the chanting for, let's see, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. And then we will have 10 minutes of silent meditation after that. Because it's really sweet to kind of really relax into the mantra, kind of let your mind and body rest on it and just go completely into it the way you might relax into a gentle wave on the ocean. And you might want to be sitting down in a comfortable place. You might want to be lying down, whatever's going to be best for you. slowly coming out of your meditative space, bringing your awareness back into the ordinary world. So also remembering to bring the peace of meditation with you. Practices like chanting, as I was mentioning before, do put us in a different state. So you want to always check in with yourself once in a while and wonder what state you are in. Are you in a state of confusion? Are you in a state of anxiety? Or are you connected to the space of being that is beyond all of that, right? All concepts. Chanting allows us that real, wonderful treat of letting go. And that's really what all of the spiritual practices are about. Right? Letting go of who we think we are, letting go of who we think God is, letting go of what we think meditation is. So letting go of the mind, letting go of identification, letting go of suffering. All of these practices are aimed at reducing suffering and eventually completely going beyond it. So keep reminding yourself that that state is available to you. And you can do these practices such as chanting or just saying the mantra to yourself as you go about your day. That's very effective in continuing to bring yourself back, to remind yourself of your true nature. And also exploring, right? I'll check in with you in a couple minutes to see what your experience was like and if you have questions. But if this isn't something that's familiar to you, then you might want to look at different chants, right? There's a wonderful Buddhist chant, traditional chant, Om Mani Padme Hum, right? Bowing to the jewel of Buddha consciousness. In Christianity, Kyrie eleison, right? Lord have mercy. There's all different kinds of practices we can do, and there's a whole array of options waiting for you to look at, to try out, see what really evokes the most energy, the most enthusiasm, because our practices, our spiritual life should really be full of juiciness, right? Enthusiasm, joy. That's where the practices are bringing us to. So choose something that you feel enthusiastic about it and do it on a regular basis. That's the only way the mind gets beyond its usual patterns of conditioned thinking.